You're looking at the aftermath of the deadly car bomb explosion in Oslo, Norway, minutes after it detonated near the Prime Minister's office. Another attack occurred with a gunman at a children's camp in Norway as well, and we expect more details will emerge throughout the day. I'm James Poulos. Joining me for analysis of this breaking story as it develops are Cliff May, the president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and James Carafano at the Heritage Foundation. Cliff, let me start with you. Give us the latest here. What do we know about the attacks thus far?
Well, we know there were two attacks. Last I have seen, no organization had taken responsibility, so we really can't say who's behind this, but obviously there are suspicions. In particular, leader of Ansar al-Islam, Partisans of Islam is the name of the organization. It's a jihadist organization, not part of al-Qaeda, but affiliated, I think you could say, with al-Qaeda. He was sentenced in a Norwegian court. He made certain threats. I think the prevailing theory right now is that this is some sort of retaliatory attack by members of Ansar al-Islam.
James, this isn't the first time Norway has been targeted. There have been attacks before. Can you tell us about some of the other groups who might be suspected of being involved here? Just flesh this out a little bit for us, what their motivation might be.
Well, I mean, we could go on with speculating. There was an al-Qaeda cell that was arrested in Norway in 2010. There was a 2008 plot. There's also right-wing extremist groups. There's been violence against synagogues. There's been violence against Muslim mosques. So Norway's a great country, but even Norway's got some pretty despicable people. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to speculate. I mean, if we've learned anything in the decade in the war on terrorism, we've learned that it's kind of not a good idea to get out ahead of the facts. If you look at both these kind of terrorist attacks, or both these kind of attacks, the one thing we do know is that they're both the kind that we're going to be able to gather a lot of evidence very quickly. The armed assault, which the latest reports I said that they think it's not linked to the bombing, obviously there you've got a suspect, so they're going to get to the bottom of that pretty quickly. The other one, which is obviously a bombing, bombs leave a lot of forensic evidence. If you think back to the Murrah office building, the vehicle that carried that bomb was completely obliterated, but they still got the VIN number, the identification number, off the bumper, and they were able to find the individual. So they're going to be able to gather a lot of evidence. They're going to interview witnesses. So these attacks, we're going to know something about these attacks in relatively short order, and they're going to give us some pretty good clues, regardless of whether somebody stands up and takes claim for them or not. I don't quite understand this compulsion to kind of get out ahead of the facts and start blaming people and drawing lessons. I thought what Cliff said is exactly right. There's lots of candidates out there, but we certainly don't have any evidence at this point or anybody claiming credit for them.
Cliff, let's stay grounded in the real world then. You look at attacks like these, they seem to have a political character. We're still putting the pieces together. But this is just bringing back to the fore a question that we've heard before. We still haven't answered to our satisfaction. Let's see if you can take another crack at it right now. How do you prevent these kinds of attacks, or how do you respond in a way that can keep us safe, whether we happen to be in Norway or in the United States, without eviscerating civil liberties?
Well, it's very difficult to be 100% secure, and actually you can't. I mean, you can make it more difficult, and I think you should, for people to get their hands on explosives or even on firearms. I think there are ways to do that, but not entirely, not in Norway, certainly not in the US, where you have certain civil liberties that have to be protected, including the Second Amendment, which allows people to get firearms. I don't think necessarily terrorist suspects or felons should be able to have that access. You need to do good intelligence work is what you really need to do, so that you know who's in your country and you know who may be affiliated with bad guy groups, and you know what they're plotting. Good intelligence is hard, it's painstaking. You can have sting operations, and I think you should. A legitimate sting operation is not entrapment. We've had a number of those here in the US where those who planned and hoped to carry out terrorist attacks were foiled. And I also think you need to go aggressively against terrorist organizations wherever they are found, where they are plotting, where they are training. You want, if you can, to make it impossible for them to leave that soil and get to your soil. But at the end of the day, you cannot stop all terrorist attacks. You can't expect to. But you want those who are involved in terrorism anywhere in the world to be nervous, to be looking over their shoulder. They have to be hunted. You don't want them to have state backing and support. You have to have an aggressive intelligence and counterterrorism program for the United States, for Norway, for whatever country.
James, let me get your view in here as we close out. Regardless of how much energy we put into counterterrorism, whether it's on the criminal side or the military side, we've got to ask, are attacks like these ultimately, at the end of the day, just part of the cost of freedom?
Well, look, terrorism is a defeatable phenomenon. I mean, if you look at the scale of terrorist attacks against the United States, those peaked in the late 1980s because mostly state-sponsored terrorism. At the fall of the wall, they declined significantly. Terrorist attacks against the United States peaked in 2005, and they've been on the decline ever since. So you can battle terrorism. This thing, you just have to live with this. It's simply not true. You can battle it. There have been at least 40 terrorist attacks aimed at the United States since 9/11 that have been thwarted. Most of them were thwarted exactly the way Cliff discussed, which is we went out and we found the terrorists first before they did anything. That's how you get your biggest bang for the security buck. So freedom and democracy doesn't have to be complacent against terrorism, and it can win. And you don't have to sacrifice freedoms and liberties to defeat terrorism. We've learned both those things post 9/11.
Gentlemen, horrific images, a developing story. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Good seeing you, Cliff.
Good seeing you,
That was Cliff
James.
May of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. You can find their analysis on this story by visiting defenddemocracy.org. And you can find James Carafano online at heritage.org. For PJTV, I'm James Poulos.